The variant inflation. Is Canada really in a housing inflation bubble? Is inflation and the stimulus spending to blame for soaring house prices? What can the government actually do? We'll speak to the man who was Canada's housing czar until just April, the former CEO of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, Evan Siddall. Stay right here with Question Period. Well, this says it all. Billionaire financier John Paulson once said, if you don't own a home, buy one. And if you own a home, buy another one. And if you own two homes, buy a third. Buy a third? Oh, yeah, right. Billionaires giving advice on housing is like fish giving advice on flying. It doesn't apply to most people. In Canada, for most people, just buying a single home, let alone three homes, is almost impossible. A new report from RE/MAX shows prices are projected to increase by an average of 9.2% across Canada next year. And right now, the average cost of a home is nearly $717,000. Now, the Conservatives argue that the rising inflation rate and the soaring housing costs are all the result of Liberal stimulus spending. The Liberals say no, the Conservatives are simply ready to abandon helping Canadians keep up. Check out this sample of the debate.
We now have the biggest housing bubble in the world outside of New Zealand, and Toronto and Vancouver are the fifth and second most expensive housing markets in the world, ahead of Manhattan, San Francisco, London, and others. Wow. So if this Prime Minister is not to blame, then exactly what is causing this housing price inflation?
One has to at least recognize that the Conservatives are consistent in their approach and that they want to do less whenever they're confronted with a problem. Canadians are challenged with a housing crisis right now, and we are moving forward with programs to help first-time homebuyers, to invest money for municipalities so that they can cut red tape and build more supply.
So politics aside, what's really to blame for the hot housing market? Is Canada at risk of a housing correction? Is this a bubble? Let's find out. Joining me now is Evan Siddall. From January of 2014 to April of 2021, just a few months ago, he was the CEO of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. They have a simple mandate to make housing affordable for everyone in Canada. How's that going? Mr. Siddall is now the CEO of the Alberta Investment Management Corporation. They only oversee $118 billion of investment. So welcome to the program. This is the hottest debate in politics, as you know, and I think for everyone, Evan Siddall. The Conservatives blame the Liberals for the high cost of housing, their stimulus spending. The Liberals say high prices are a result of global pandemic. In your view, what is driving the rise in house prices?
It's supply and demand. It's just that simple. Demand is increasing. It increased during COVID, and supply is constrained. And as when you have supply constrained and demand increasing, prices go up. It's that simple.
Okay, but is that demand, is it because of the low interest rates that's driving it?
Sure.
I mean, there must be a lot of factors, because in the last 20 years, the average house price has gone up 375%. Toronto and Vancouver close to 450%. So that's over every government. So what's been driving it for 2 decades?
Yeah, it's not a political issue, Evan. It is a question. It is for sure low rates. It's also just increasing economic growth. And then on top of that, there are government stimulus packages around housing that contribute to demand. On the other side, the government simply cannot contribute enough money in the size of this market to create the supply that's needed.
Okay, the Liberals say, no, sorry, we have a plan to deal with high home prices. We're going to increase supply. We're going to be building affordable homes through the $4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund, the first-time home buyers incentive. Are those effective? Are those enough?
They are at the margin. And let's face it, that's all government can really do on the supply side. It's too much for a government to handle. We're talking trillions of dollars in housing activity, Evan. It's not a supply. It is a supply problem, but it's not a supply problem the government can deal with on its own. It needs private sector support.
Okay. We got a fiscal update on December 14th. The Conservatives are saying, rein it in the spending because the spending is driving house prices. What would your response be?
I'd say it's not about the spending on house prices. It's actually about much more the demand and the slow supply response. So that, again, is market factors, including slow approvals. And there's a lack of coordination among municipal, provincial, and federal governments. And it's hard for people to build houses. That's one problem. The other problem is low rates make housing even more attractive. Mortgage insurance makes it further attractive. And the fact that we don't tax capital gains on houses, I know this is a lousy political issue, also contributes to demand. All those things make prices.
Okay. By the way, you just, not a lousy political issue, you probably said something that made people's hair fall out, which is capital gains on your first home, your residence. For most people, some governments even musing about taxing their
Political suicide.
It's political suicide, but it also would take people's retirement and torch it. Is that actually a consideration?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't be retroactive. It would take place from now forward. One of the things that's really driving people apart in terms of inequality in our country is the amount of money people are making off houses who own them versus the amount of money people aren't making on their homes that rent them. It's a real problem, Evan. And why don't we tax gains on houses, but we do tax gains on other investments? It's a serious, non-progressive situation in our tax code.
Okay, like you've been in the game on this. Are politicians actually even thinking about that?
No, because it's political suicide. Because it gets into a silly debate about, you're not going to take my money from me. Well, there's some people who don't have that money, and this is a real problem in this country, and it's getting worse.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So you're saying capital gains on houses would be one, as you say, maybe political suicide. But you have go ahead.
It could be above the threshold, right? You could be allowed to make a certain amount of money tax free and tax above that. There are lots of options, but politicians just aren't allowed to have this conversation because the opposition, and it's any color, will skewer them for it, and so we don't have the debate we have to have.
Okay. Well, what is the debate we need to have?
How do we structure a progressive capital gains tax on principal residences? I think that's a legitimate conversation.
Wow.
You can make $1,000 a year, let's say, on that, but nothing more, and we'll tax above. These are all options that people could explore.
Okay, you talk about low interest rates. Again, that's monetary policy, that's the bank. And I know this is politicized. You do have Pierre Poilievre saying things like flooding the market by printing money is causing inflation rates. Look, interest rates are going to go up. We know that. The governor of the bank was on this program a couple of weeks ago saying, not a lot, but they're going to start incrementally climbing. What impact will that have?
That will slow down demand for housing. It will, because it is a very rate-sensitive consumable, rate-sensitive investable. It's highly correlated to interest rates, and that will slow things down when rates go up. That's true. It's important to not blame the governor of the Bank of Canada for housing results. That's a fiscal choice. He has one lever, and it's interest rates. How that's toggled within people's choices is a question for fiscal policy, not monetary policy.
But if interest rates go up and people have taken on huge mortgages, are we at risk of a housing bubble bursting?
No, we're not, because the overwhelming majority of Canadians have fixed rate mortgages, and those who have shorter term mortgages actually have to sustain interest rates as if they were fixed. And on top of that, we have the very controversial stress test in Canada, which adds a premium on top of the current mortgages in the underwriting. So said differently, there's a cushion already in the housing market for the possibility that prices may go up.
Pierre Poilievre, the finance critic for the Conservatives, Evan Siddall, says that we are in the world's second largest housing bubble. He quotes it all the time. We're just after New Zealand. That we are in a housing bubble. Is Canada in a housing bubble?
I don't think we're in a bubble. I really don't think we're in a bubble. I think that there are real underlying factors of demand, including economic growth, immigration, COVID shifts in preferences, and we're not building housing fast enough. Prices go up in that situation.
But I guess the question is why? Again, I'm trying to get precise here.
Yeah.
Conservatives say under Stephen Harper, and I know you were appointed under Stephen Harper, the average house price was $450,000. Now the average house price under Justin Trudeau is $720,000. They say, see, this is what's happened because of your spending. How would you parse that?
I would say that's not true. The mortgage insurance and tax-free capital gains on housing existed under the Conservatives and the Liberals. It's not a political partisan issue. It's a core construct of our housing market, and it's going to require some political courage to get underneath it. But I reject the fact that it's one fault versus the other.
Okay, you're sitting down with Chrystia Freeland. She's about to deliver her fiscal update December 14th. She says, hey, look, I'm getting every day they're questioning me about inflation and housing inflation. You know this market better than anybody in the country, Evan Siddall. What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong?
What I would do is I would look at the construct of mortgage insurance. I mean, frankly, I'd like to look at the capital gains on principal residences, but I think that's a step too far, to be fair to the Minister of Finance and other opposition politicians. But I would look at the mortgage insurance program and how stimulative it is. I'd increase the minimum down payment from 5 to 10% for sure. And I might even bracket it from, it's currently 5 to 20% down payment, go from 10 to 25. Cover more of the waterfront, require more equity. I actually think that would be a smart move.
Evan Siddall, some straight talk. I like it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Evan.
All right, coming up, time for a boost.